Hello and welcome, dear friends. We're just so honored and delighted that you chose to be with us today in this salon. Today is the UN International Day of Conscience, and together we will be exploring the role of conscience in global affairs. It's a salon, so we're going to be engaging you in this dialogue. Sound intriguing? I hope so, because you're here and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. I'm Tezikiah Gabriel from Pathways to Peace and the UN Unitive Cluster. Our salon today is hosted by the UN Unitive Cluster, and you might be asking yourself, who or what is the Unitive Cluster? The UN NGO Major Group Unitive Cluster is focused on unity and grounded in advances in science that confirm the holistic integrity of life on Earth. This emergent understanding of the unitive nature of all beings is coherent with indigenous wisdom and spiritual teachings. The existential, that rolls off the tongue, the existential nature and reality of our interconnectedness provides new ground for accelerating progress on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. The Unitive Cluster brings a unitive perspective and unitive action to interventions that reflect the integration, intersectionality, indivisibility, and interlinkages between all SDGs. In other words, we have this wonderful opportunity at the cluster to bring unity to the UN. It just does not get better than that. It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joni Carley. Joni is the founder of the UN Unitive Cluster and a recognized and respected representative of civil society to the UN. She is an author and a brilliant thinker and leader. She is a colleague and friend. Joni, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you. We have been having some technical difficulties and we expected a whole lot more people and we're worried they're not getting in the room. So we're glad you're here. We're glad you made it. Today's agenda is that we're going to explore the connections between conscience and global conditions. And I want to just tell you that Murrell from the Baha'i International Center and Sabita Geer, representing the Brahma Kumaris, and I are just going to lay some common ground, and then we'll spend most of this session in dialogue after we do that. So we do feel that it's part of our mission to honor UN Day of Conscience because the cluster focuses on that we need to develop a culture of peace for the SDGs to be achieved. And we know how important the role of consciousness is in developing a culture of peace. And also, we really understand the impact of intangible factors like conscience and love on outcomes. And so we really work in that space at the UN, that intangible space. And so this day is especially important to us. And if you go back and look at the declaration that the General Assembly made for the International Day of Conscience, the invitation is to all member states, organizations of the UN system, international and regional organizations, as well as private sector and civil society, and non-governmental organizations and individuals to build the culture of peace with love and conscience. And that's General Assembly words, to do that with love and conscience. And so if you look back at that, though, member states, organizations of the UN, international and regional organizations, private sector, civil society, non-government organizations, and individuals, that's everybody. That's everybody. And so the International Day of Conscience is a day, it's really an invitation to everybody on the planet to recognize the role of conscience in the world we want to create. And so I want to just take a little bit of time before we get going today to tease out the differences and the intersectionality between conscience and consciousness. And because again, leaning on UN documents, UNESCO in its constitution says that since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it's in the minds of men and women that defenses of peace must be constructed. And in the Unitive Cluster, we really recognize that mindset matters. It's causal. We recognize that conscience is a core component of mindset. And we also recognize that what we might think of as mindset is located in the broader domain of consciousness. If you look in the dictionary, it says that consciousness is a state of being aware and of responsive to one's surroundings, or the state of being awake and alert. Like after the accident, the driver regained consciousness. So awake, alert, awareness. But if the way that we work with those words, that definition is very superficial. Spiritual teachers, philosophers, psychologists throughout the ages have unveiled layers of consciousness. It's not all just I'm aware of what's going on around me in the room. And there's no real words to describe it because we're into the realm of mystery and metaphysics. But one way of thinking about it is like layers of an onion that are infinite. You are, as we dance through the spiral of life, we're going through these infinite layers of the onion to get to these deeper levels of consciousness. In Hinduism, they have a concept of the thousand-petaled lotus, right? It's always unfolding into greater beauty, greater love, unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. And so that's really kind of one way of looking at the nature of consciousness. Consciousness is like a subtle body of information and energy that we sense from the inside, but it's not localized in our bodies. We can't see it, but without consciousness, there's no seeing. Krishna said that water cannot wet it, wind cannot dry it, weapons cannot shatter it, fire cannot burn it. It's ancient, it's unborn, and it's not subject to death. Consciousness is where we know peacefulness, and it's the domain where we sense our own contentment and where our values live. We experience consciousness as an inner domain of reality, but it's determinant of every outer reality that we encounter. Consciousness is a primal generator as well as the ultimate interpreter of our reality. So you could say it's both the alpha and the omega. Both science and philosophy tell us that consciousness is a generative power. It generates or determines what our experiences are and how we're impacted by those experiences. Consciousness always comes first. It's fundamental and it's root causal. In other words, consciousness is the catalyst for everything, everywhere. As goes our consciousness, so goes the world. So the bottom line is that consciousness is the primary determining factor of the human experience, and it literally determines how we live and how we evolve. And I would submit to you that every social crisis is first and foremost a crisis of consciousness. And so that's the domain we need to work in. And so let's look now at conscience. If you go again back to the dictionary definition of it, it's an inner feeling or voice that tells you whether your actions are right or wrong, or it's a sense of moral right or wrong. His conscience wouldn't allow him to lie, is an example of that. So it's that moral, ethical inner voice. And to keep them straight, you could say it's important to be conscious of what your conscience is telling you to do. And so I think that phrase is a good delineator. But the idea of conscience also has deeper implications. The three of us who are speaking today are faith-based, and so we really root it in, and the Unitive Cluster recognizes that domain of work as a solid domain of work, even though it's intangible. So we see it like our conscience is like an inner GPS. It's hardwired to track things like justice, goodness, and love. And just like there are greater and lesser sophistication in any kind of GPS, you can get GPS that's kind of terrible and a GPS that's always right on, and the the more we follow our conscience, the more we're conscious of our conscience, the more we give it our value and prominence, the greater access we have to the greater spectrum of conscience. And that is so called on right now, that we go into a full spectrum of conscience. On one level, conscience is like a gatekeeper. It kicks in when we risk compromising our own values and ethics. And the only question is whether or not we observe our own gatekeeping, which is the art, and for us as humans is paying attention. And that's why we want to celebrate today, to raise it up of how critical it is. When we really tune into it, we have no doubt there's something that's visceral in the experience. We just know, it's an inner knowing that our conscience gives us and allows us to tap into. So, and it also helps us tap into kind of a non-local awareness, right? Even though our conscience is deeply personal and it taps us into consciousness at the larger level, it also taps us into this greater good, because that's a lot of times what it steers us toward, is being better and better citizens of the world. So, and it calls us to make a difference, and a bigger and bigger difference. The more we tap into our conscience, the less personal it seems to get. Until we hit a conflict of conscience, which is very easy to happen around the UN. There are so many kinds of compromises we need to make, and we feel it. It feels like a kind of an internal rubbing the wrong way. It feels like static in the system. It's like a disturbance. And conflicts of conscience mostly arise because the cultural stream, the greater cultural stream, is often running in the other direction of what our consciences tell us to do, because it is so dysfunctional right now. There's so much dysfunction in the cultural stream that our conscience tells us one thing, and there's everything else going in a different direction. And so we're stuck with that kind of that internal wrestling. And we just need to figure out, how do we move beyond doubting our internal GPSs? Because that's what starts to happen when we get the pushback from this cultural stream. We start to doubt. We start to silence that voice. And nothing could be worse than for global conditions. Even though that sounds like a little personal thing in the moment, it is not. It's critical to global well-being. So it's time to flip the script. And that's what we're trying to do today, to prioritize that inner GPS that of our conscience, to invite our conscience to be our policy advisor. What if every high-level leader was using their conscience as their number one policy advisor? What kind of world would that be? It would be a world where the golden rule rules. And I think it's no accident that today is also Golden Rule Day, because it's so fitting. You know, the golden rule is really a significant guidepost for our conscience. The degree to which we are conscious of our conscience is the degree to which we are going to have highly reliable policy, because it is the best policy advisor there is when it's clear, when it's tapped into in its full glory and essence, when it's unobliterated, uninterrupted by all the other things that flow through our minds and hearts. And we really tap into it, we have that deeper knowing. And so as we move into our session, we'd like you to start thinking about, after our next two guests speak, we're going to get into the conversation of, how does conscience matter in global affairs and in the UN agenda? And so I'll leave you with that question as I introduce my dear and wonderful colleague, Sabita Geer. She's the UN representative of the Brahma Kumaris in New York for the past 10 years. Her work is based on the understanding that real change begins with a shift in awareness, facilitated by a spiritual-based approach called Raja Yoga, which she has been practicing for over 40 years. She mentors and initiates youth, women, and men in many projects related to the SDGs, and not only at the UN, but also in countries around the world. Welcome, Sabita. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Joni. And hello, all my friends. It is great to see all of you here this morning. to begin our conversation, we thought it would be a wonderful way to start by grounding ourselves in some meditation, where we're going to take some of the thoughts that Joni shared and some of the thoughts I'm going to share with you to take us um, to make our mind a little quiet so that we can tap into that conscience of ours. And from that place, then we're going to go into conversation. So we actually coming into conversation at the same time as listening to our conscience. So let us experiment with this. Let us explore. And I'm going to share with you a few thoughts to take us into on this journey so we can tap into that light inside ourselves. Because as we heard, conscience is that little inner voice that talks to us all the time. And whether we pause to listen or not listen is a choice we always have also. And so let us use this few minutes to tap into that light. I would invite you to keep both feet on the ground. And to help us to go in, it's always so good to take a couple of deep breaths. It helps to detach ourselves from everything that's happening around us. So take in a deep breath and release. One more time. Take a deep breath in and release. And as you watch your breath in and out, allow all of the thoughts of the world to fade into the distance. And as you bring your mind to this present moment, I would like to ask you to ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? And see if you can connect that feeling with an element of nature. And today, I would like to choose the element of water. And I visualize myself walking towards a stream of water. And as I come close to that stream, and I hear the sounds of water flowing, I take a seat. I sit on the grass and I relax. My mind becomes very quiet. I turn inward with the sound of the water in the background. And looking inward, I can visualize a light just glowing, calm and shining. Holding myself in this light, I rise up and I take a look at that stream. And I realize that the water is very calm. It's glimmering, almost like glass. I look into the stream, into that water, and I see my reflection. And I see the light. Such clarity. And I realize that when my mind is calm and peaceful and I'm connected with my light, everything around me becomes clear. There is that inner clarity, and I know exactly what I need to do and what I need to say. This is tapping into my conscience and using that clarity to guide me in my decisions and choices. We are gathered here today to talk about the role of conscience in global affairs. And holding myself in this clear space, I now go into conversation. Take a deep breath in and release. And you may open your eyes.
Thank you. Thank you. And so it is, Sabita. And so it is. Thank you. We thought the first conversation for today that we would ask the question, which I'll put in the chat. How do you define conscience? And we ask you to use the chat and whatever comes to mind for you to put that into the chat. How do you define conscience? How do you define conscience? Just put your thoughts in the chat. Beautiful. Cynthia says that inner deep knowing of what is right and true. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, and Mike. Thank you, Mike. Being at one from a heart level with myself and all that's around me. And being aligned with my core principles and acting from there. Beautiful. Beautiful. A great beginning to our conversation. And at this point, oh, and Charlene, thank you, Charlene, our higher thoughts reflecting the light of revelation. All of these are just beautiful. And so at this point, Sabita, I'm going to turn the floor back to you to introduce our speaker.
Hello again. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you all and welcome our dear friend and a big brother, I would say, for me. Someone whom I had great pleasure in working with in many ways and in many events. Our organizations have done so much together over the decades. I'm talking about Carl Murrell. He is he has been working in the UN office or serving in the Baha'is UN office as an assistant since 1991 and became the principal UN representative in 2008. He works with non-governmental organizations on a number of issues, including the advancement of women, sustainable development, human rights, interfaith, a lot, and many civil society participations. And for those of you who are not so familiar with the service and the work of the Baha'is and the UN, they do tremendous work, and they've accomplished so much over the decades. And so that has been led by our friend, Carl. Previously, Carl worked in the private sector in computer software development and security investment. He's an undergraduate with study in psychology and philosophy. And so we thought, given his background in spirituality and so much work that he's done over the years in bringing spirituality to the UN and in global affairs, that he would have a lot of insight and wisdom to share with us this morning on this very interesting theme of conscience. So welcome to you, Carl, and over to you. Would you be able to unmute? No, he's not able to unmute. Let me.
Got it.
There you are. Right.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be with you all this morning. It's been an interesting time. You get up and put on the news, and the news people are anxious. I wonder why. It's good to see Francis. It's been a while. It's been a good while. We've worked together, the Values Caucus, which is trying to make a comeback, where we talked in the UN circle about values. You know, conscience is not an unchangeable absolute. One dictionary definition, although not covering all the uses of the term, presents the uncommon understanding of the word conscience as a sense of right and wrong, as regards things for which one is responsible. The faculty or principle which pronounces upon the moral quality of one's actions or motives, approving the right and condemning the wrong. The functioning of one's conscience then depends on one's understanding of right and wrong. The conscience of one person may be established upon disinterested striving after truth and justice, while that of another may rest on an unthinking predisposition to act in accordance with that patterns and principles and prohibitions, which is a product of his or her social environment. Conscience, therefore, can serve as either a bulwark or an upright character of an upright character, or can represent an accumulation of prejudices learned from one's forebears or absorbed from a limited social code. So then how does one's growth, if you will, foster the development of his conscience in an uplifting way? How do we free ourselves from idle fancy and imitation? How do we discern things with an eye of oneness and look into all things with a searching eye? This process of development, therefore, involves a clear-sighted examination of the conditions of the world with both heart and mind. In order to uphold such principles, in certain cases, the voluntary submission of our own personal conscience to the decision of the majority is a conscientious requirement. And as in wholeheartedly accepting the majority decision of a group that we are involved in at the outcome of an open-hearted consultation of our opinions. That's one of the things that makes a collaborative community, which we need. To pursue truth, an unfettered search for truth, unfettered search, which is organic, logically coherent, should cause us to examine our own ideas and motives and not be a blind imitation, but a conscious choice, freely made and freely followed. There are 3 types of freedom for the purpose of this discussion. Divine freedom inherited on the inherent contributions of the Creator, if you will. The second is political freedom, which leaves the individual free to do whatever they desire as long as their action does not harm their neighbor. The third freedom is, if you will, a spiritual freedom. Freedom of the human word, where our affections are severed from material things and our wealth comes from things beyond what is material, even though there can be appreciation for those things. The deepening and enrichment of the spiritual life of the individual, the increasing comprehension of essential verities, training in organizational principles that are there for all, having objectives which embrace all. That leads to the edification of and progress and consolidation of the planet Earth, which is in actuality one community. Let me stop there because I was in a conference all day yesterday, and I know how it is to sit and listen when we have things in our hearts. So let's hear from each other.
Wonderful, Carl. Thank you so very much for sharing food for thought that prompts our own thinking about conscience and global affairs and so much more. So thank you, thank you, thank you for that. And now it is time for us to begin to dialogue together. And the way that we're going to do that is, first of all, to have an opportunity to share in small groups, in breakout rooms. And we have a question that we'll put on the table for you for that first group. And then we're going to come back together, share what took place in our breakout rooms, but then have a full group discussion. So, are you ready? Are you? Now I want to see, are you ready to move into breakout rooms? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So, I'm going to pause with the question that you're going to be pondering in your room, in the chat. So, given what you've heard so far, what is your conscience telling you now? Okay? Given what you've heard so far, what is your conscience telling you now? Welcome back. So good to see you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Tez.
Hi, John. How are you?
You've got two friends here.
It's true. So glad that Jerry could join us today. He's a very beloved friend for a long time. Happy to see all of you coming back. I hope your conversations were amazing. Yes, Shirley, that's great. So you are going to have an opportunity to kind of share your breakout group highlights, insights, ahas, whatever's on your heart. And so you can raise your hand or raise your electronic hand. Oh, Charlene, would you like to start? Go ahead and unmute.
Hello, everybody. I had a great conversation with Mike. Turns out Mike and I had met 6 months ago at International Day of Peace, San Francisco, 40th anniversary. And so he's working to do some more beautiful work with youth. And so my inspiration from all the conversations earlier about the consciousness of our youth generation, all of us, mostly gray-haired people, have an opportunity and an obligation to help with the consciousness of the younger generations. And so that's what, and I got from yesterday, I was in New York virtually on the Zoom with the New York gathering for all the school kids that time. And so it showed me that through the arts and through youth is our direction. And I'm hoping that we can something like that in San Francisco. So that's affirmations from the last 24 hours. Yeah.
Thank you, Charlene. I did get your email. So looking forward. And so who else would like to share? And if you'd rather share in the chat, you can do that as well. But who else would like to speak out anything about their group? Any reflections?
Well, I liked my group, and I'd like one of them to speak about it.
Perfect. Who would you like to speak about it, John?
Both of them.
So I think that was Jerry and Cynthia, right?
We don't have a Cynthia. Charlene?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Cynthia.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Would you like to go first, Jerry? I can go since I've got the mic here. Well, one thing that Jerry talked about, which I found quite interesting, was just he was working with someone in Ukraine who's obviously, I can't remember the title she has, but trying to negotiate waging a war with her own inner political, her own inner consciousness and conscience, and just wanting to working on making political affairs more human-centered, which, I totally agree with that. That's something I deal with every day. I'm making documentaries, so I'm trying to put the themes into my documentaries about the Gandhis. And
Perfect.
one thing that John mentioned, which I found quite fascinating, was a book called The Sociopath Next Door, which is something I haven't read about, but you know, it sounds really interesting. And the fact is, some people don't have a conscience. It's one thing he said, which is kind of interesting to ponder, you know, when you think about that. 1 in 25, maybe, something like that. So we have to factor in those people when those of us who are trying to get certain messages out in whatever way we are, such as I am through film, through documentaries on the Gandhis. You know, we have to factor that in, that some people just don't even, I mean, it doesn't resonate at all with them, you know, these people. And it's kind of like Mussolini, I guess, who said about Gandhi when the British were having such troubles with him, just said, well, why don't you just shoot him? You know, so there are people like that in today's world, you know. So anyway, but so that I found those two things they talked about quite interesting. I myself spoke about truth, just the challenge of I see truth as an absolute that, you know, I'm seeking, but it's multi-sided, and I know people view it differently. And but I know also people have their own, you know, filters and backgrounds and experiences, so they may see truth different than I do. But anyway, I just see that as a challenge for today's world, particularly in the political world or the global affairs world, is how to um, disseminate truth and facts and, you know, what's really happening, as opposed to what isn't and what hasn't and will never be, but is thrown out as if it is truth, or true, I should say. Anyway, those are some ramblings that, you know, I spoke about, but so it was a great experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jerry, would you like to add? You can unmute.
No, a thing that jumped out at me was genuinely thanks for creating the experience, because when the three of us, you know, had the opportunity to chat for a little bit, it was comfortable to share about, you know, complex and important things. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. It was quite wonderful.
Makes my heart sing to have you here, Jerry. Just saying.
And that covers it, because I think you did a good job of reporting, but also the depth of her sharing was part of what made it comfortable. And then we all sort of could move back and forth on the different levels. And so it's hard to kind of summarize it in a neat package, but I'm glad you shared that little bit, Jerry.
Beautiful. Thank you. And who else would like to share a couple of highlights, insights?
You had such a important thing that you brought through. Do you want to speak to it?
I guess I was just sort of reflecting on the idea of conscience and how it relates to people's own particular worldview, and you know, how, I don't know, I think in a free country you can have different worldviews, but in other countries only one worldview is allowed. And so where does conscience fit into that? So yeah, my final comment was seeing how I thought that all of us have a worldview which recognizes sort of the oneness of all creation, shall we say, which isn't focused on kind of social ideas that have emerged from some, looking at the world religions, shall we say, that the basic truths, if you want to talk about truth, the basic guidelines are all very similar. But it's the sort of the social cultural things that have been developed since that seem to cause the most trouble when it comes to conscience. I was talking about the notion of the cake maker who refused to make a cake for a gay couple because their conscience wouldn't let them.
Yes.
And that's got nothing to do with I think love for me is kind of the number one part of all the great religions, and it's got nothing to do with love at all. Anyway, just those are sorts of things
Beautiful.
I was reflecting on.
And that brought up for me the question of how do we transcend the acculturations that color our conscience? And someone said that some people don't have a conscience. And I don't know if I believe that, but I do believe that it gets muddied over by all kinds of things, including cultural norms and all kinds of other issues. And like I said earlier, I do feel like there's like a clearing process. And the more we dip in and recognize our conscience, the more we allow it to lead the way in faith, even though sometimes it may say, do this, and we want to do that. But when we do this because our conscience said so, then the next time our conscience is clearer and more expanded. And I think the nature of it is, as it expands, it becomes less occupied with the self, less occupied with the small world that's defined by these acculturations, and more tapped into that more universal consciousness. And it's and there are generations of wounding that often can make that voice of conscience take almost the full generation to relocate it, let alone hear it and act on it. So people are in different places, and yet still we know when we can get there, it really is an accurate GPS.
Yes. Beautiful, Joni. Thank you. Thank you, Francis, for putting that question on the table. Sabita or Carl, would you like to add anything at this point?
I would just like to add one more thing, that with actually what I've heard so far is so beautiful, but to add to that, this what is my conscience telling me is this we awareness. It's not just one of us, but it's all of us. It's a collective thing. It's all of us together that is going to make a difference. But of course, it has to start from within. And we all do have a conscience, otherwise we can't be alive. It's just that we just don't listen to it, or we don't know how to listen to it, how to tap into that so that we can hear it. But I do believe that this we, and this was what came up in our group, the we is not just us, as Charlene was saying, the gray hair ones, but to include the youth, because it has to be intergenerational if we want that kind of shift to take place.
Yes. Carl?
Yeah, what I'll add, added previously, is that we forget the power of the individual. So, as I mentioned, the Commission on the Status of Women is the largest UN conference that has ended a couple weeks ago, and I was in a session. It had 4 speakers. But as it went on, what you learned was the 4 speakers was a youth and an elder. So each of the 4 was 2 people. And one of the things that each of the groups, the speakers, did when they concluded was each elder and each youth spoke to the person who spoke in their group so warmly, so affectionately. And of course, you can't have that experience unless you're together. And the other one about individuals was yesterday. I tell you, I was at a global conference about cities. They had, a billionaire. He owns the Miami Dolphins, if you know football, and he has been a major contributor to Hudson Yards, if you know that area in New York. And he wanted to do some work in West Miami Beach. And he spoke to the mayor of that city. They sat down and spoke individually. They said, yes, we know you can build buildings. Congratulations. And we know you're planning to build them here and make money. Congratulations. But I'd like to tell you about the city, the individuals in the city. And so he transformed this billionaire's thinking about wealth into how what he was doing could make the city better. And that would not have happened if those two individuals had not had that conversations.
What's the role of conscience in global affairs? And what is the role of conscience in accomplishing UN objectives? They're big questions without a lot of time.
I think it's difficult to address those questions without a working definition of what conscience is, because I think there's broader definitions and there's narrower definitions, and I've sort of sensed that from some of this discussion.
We actually
So
laid that out in the beginning, John. We went into a lot of those in the beginning, so we did cover that, but sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
All right.
Other thoughts in response to these questions? Thanks for stepping into it, John, to get the ball rolling. I appreciate that.
Do you have other thoughts, John, about what your definition and how it applies?
Well, I have different perspectives on it. I mean, I have a limited definition that I might use, which is more like our personal sense of what's right and wrong. And that's variable with different people according to their, innate being, as well as the cultural and social and familial influences in their life. And that can evolve, that can change. And I think a lot has to do with it. I mean, guilt, it's that sense there's some force inside us that makes us feel uncomfortable when we're off track. And how do we listen to that? Or do we even have it? Because that's what some people do not have.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the role of that in UN objectives? Like, is there something we can tap into to do a better job at our work?
I don't know. Given the fact that I don't know if that's the angle to address. We're looking at the work we're trying to do with the UN on subtle levels in terms of influencing the field, and whether conscience is the avenue. I don't have an answer.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yes, Charlene, did you raise your hand? You can unmute.
Okay, it's kind of a question or a feeling or something. It seems to me maybe the NGOs are the conscience of the governmental organization. I don't know. It feels that way to me. And the NGOs people who are in it are there for the heart. That's feeling apparent to me with this little discussion and other things I've done. So the question is, what's the nexus between NGOs and the governmental affairs? That's one. And then also that whole organizational body of the governmental United Nations. How are those people selected to represent those countries? It's a governance question that, in my view, has to start with the individuals creating the right people to be representing them at the global level. We're not at that stage of national development at this point, but that is the goal that we're looking towards, to have highly respected, highly ethical, highly conscious, globally conscious people at governmental levels taking their place around the table at the United Nations. Right now, it's a divisive thing. But I think Carl is the one I'd like to hear from him because he's been in the weeds of this for decades. So Carl,
Carl,
what are your questions, your comments about that, please?
Well, I don't know. Have we said what the UN thinks it is? May I?
Yeah, please.
yes,
The International Day is observed today,
yes.
and
Actually, tomorrow.
it was established, yeah, the 5th, excuse me. The it was established to create a culture of peace, tolerance, and understanding
Mhm.
through conscience and ethical behavior. It encourages individual societies to practice compassion, integrity, and justice, promote peace resolutions to conflicts, inspire people to reflect on their actions and responsibilities towards creating a better world. It was created in 2019, recognizing the importance of moral conscience in achieving global peace and sustainable development. And how can it be observed? We're doing, reflect on personal and societal values, engage in acts of kindness and ethical decision-making, participate in discussions on peace, human rights, and social justice, which we are doing, and spread awareness through social media and community events.
Thank you for bringing us back to core, Carl. Thank you. And as we're drawing down our time, again, unless people wish to continue, but we also recognize some of you may need to leave for other commitments. So I'm just going to call on each of you for any kind of reflection. It would be great if it related to these questions, but if not, just a reflection that you're leaving with. And if you wish to pass, you get to. And so, Cynthia, I'm going to begin with you just quickly.
Well, I'm just very thankful to have participated in this. Just felt instantly connected to everyone, and also will go away thinking about these questions. I've jotted a number of them down, and they're good for me to go over and reflect on perhaps during my meditation daily. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this.
Be
Oh.
interesting to see a documentary on conscience.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
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 Conscience and
Well,
conscience.
yeah, well, I'm doing doing one on Kasturba Gandhi, and she certainly had one.
Yes. Yes. And Francis, anything you would add in response to the questions for?
I was just thinking in terms of the last question relating to the UN and what I was saying about social cultural norms and religions and so on. It's as though the UN somehow or other manages to set out a kind of global culture or norm, or if you like, for all countries to follow, which I think, generally speaking, we would probably approve of. Obviously, some countries are not following those things and don't seem to have a conscience about it. And somebody said about the NGOs being the conscience. I think part of the role of the NGOs, and why a lot of governments don't like us, is to pressure the governments to keep onto these norms and so on, the development goals, whatever. That's just thoughts. Yeah, so enough for me.
Thank you, Francis. And Jerry, anything that you would add at this point? And you can unmute or you can pass, totally up to you.
I think I'll pass for the moment. Thanks. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And so closing summary, closing reflections, Sabita, Joni.
I like that we NGOs are the conscience of the UN. And given that, we shouldn't stop raising our voice, because that's what the conscience does. Our conscience always talks to us. We just probably don't listen because we have other agendas that we think are more important, and we listen to that. But if we can pause and listen to our conscience, or allow the voice of our conscience to raise, then it will definitely lead us in the right direction. So as NGOs, let us continue to be the conscience of the UN.
Yes, thank you, Sabita. Joni?
My thoughts are use this word generously and bring it forward. We tend to tiptoe around this kind of territory and name it and claim it. And, I mean, we all have our work to do to tap into less unfettered conscience, right? We're fettered by our acculturations and beliefs and all of that. And as we rise into our own consciousness, we become untethered to those, and we tap into the greater good. And part of doing that is just to open the space for it, to bring it forward, use the word for the whole rest of the year. And we'll see you again in this time, in this space next year. Not this time necessarily, but it is our commitment to celebrate this every year. Last year we did it in a huge way with probably thousands of people there. This year we wanted to keep it more intimate. And so we're really glad you came and joined us today.
Yes. So thank you for those of you who need to depart. Again, we are so very grateful that you are here. Carl, thank you so much for the wisdom that you brought to us that prompted our thinking, laid a foundation for us to act upon. And at Pathways to Peace, we always say, just remember wherever you're at and wherever you've been, wherever you're going, remember you are a pathway to peace. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to our next connection.